Okay, folks, we are back. This is the third and final installment in this little mini-series of video blogs called Gold Bear Bonds, Audits, Speculations, and Really Wild Speculations, Part 3. And obviously, we are at Part 3 for the really wild speculations. And I want to preface this little video blog with a comment. The comment is this: what I'm about to do is wild speculation. There is not a shred of evidence out there in support of anything I'm about to suggest as an interpretation or a possible interpretation of this vast interrelated complex that I've been calling the bearer bond scandals. We might also call them the gold repatriation scandals, all right? Because I do think that at that very minimum basic level, the bearer bond scandal is connected with the recent attempts because of their contemporaneousness, because of the fact that the bearer bond scandals emerged, and then within a couple of years after the bearer bond scandals popped up in the media, we see all of these countries suddenly, Venezuela, India, Switzerland, Germany, clamoring to get their gold reserves repatriated to their countries. All right. So at that level, I do think we see, as I outlined yesterday in yesterday's installment, I think we do see the bare outlines, the threadbare outlines of number one, factional infighting between the financial elites of Europe and North America and the Bank of England and so on, or as I called them yesterday, the Rockefeller and Rothschild interests. And we see also the possible outline of a hidden system of finance, a hidden tier of finance that we do know was used set up by President Truman to remain a secret mechanism of finance for political action, covert operations, and so on and so forth. All right. So we are seeing at least the outlines, the threadbare outlines of a breakaway civilization there. But let's go to this idea of a breakaway civilization for a moment. Because in Richard Dolan's model, and I think he is really on to something here, in his model, the breakaway civilization represents a secret civilization that quite literally has possession of some very advanced technologies that has pulled it ahead, so far ahead of the rest of the world, that its own culture, its outlook on things is vastly different than the public culture and societies that we live in. Now, the reason I'm going to that and emphasizing technology is I wrote a book, many of you have probably read it, called The Philosopher's Stone, and the subtitle of it was Alchemy and the Secret Research for Exotic Matter. All right. In that book, I pointed out that during the interwar period between World War I and World War II, Japanese and German scientists in particular noticed that under certain conditions of extreme electrical stress, mercury would indeed, minute, tiny amounts of mercury, would indeed transmute into gold. All right. And there were even patents taken out in Germany by the Siemens company that were in effect trying to patent this phenomenon and improve upon it. All right. So I'm going to speculate wildly here today. What if that breakaway civilization, whether during the war or after the war, figured out a way to make those very minute amounts of transmutations become significant amounts of transmutations? So, in other words, what if they were literally creating gold and then quietly putting it into circulation or using it as a backing, as a reserve backing, to create a system of hidden finance? That's wild speculation number one. But we have to go to another wild speculation. As I pointed out many times in connection with the bearer bond scandal, we go back to Lord Blackheath in the House of Lords in the United Kingdom and his statements that the amounts of gold officially recognized versus the amounts of gold apparently actually in existence are vastly different. And we know to a certain extent that is true because all of that gold recovered by the Japanese during Operation Golden Lily is gold that was not officially part of Western estimates of gold anyway to begin with. So already the figures of gold are tilted. Now, the final wild speculation then is this. Why are these countries, Germany particularly, with, as I mentioned in the first installment, or pardon me, in yesterday's installment, with such a huge volume of gold, over 3,000 tons of gold, why are these countries wanting to repatriate their gold? Well, the reason can only be because, number one, they suspect that those gold reserves, if left in the Bank of International Settlements, the BIS in Switzerland, or in the vaults of the Bank of England, or in the vaults of the New York Federal Reserve Bank, is somehow under a threat from those Western financial elites that it might be seized. All right. They are literally wanting to have possession of their gold, to see it, and that implies that they're worried that that gold might have gone somewhere or might go somewhere out of their reach and out of their control. The question is where? Well, if we go back to this alchemy idea, there's another fascinating thing that I've written about, and that's the so-called monatomic elements. That monatomic gold, apparently, if we believe the stories that are circulating about it, number one, in its powder form, tends to lose mass, quite literally, elsewhere. And number two, if ingested, apparently it has curative health effects. It's beneficial. And in alchemical literature, as I outlined in the Philosopher's Stone, it actually is ascribed the property of giving human beings not only good health, but longevity. All right. Could these elites then be using this gold not simply as a mechanism or hidden reserve system for a secret system of finance, but might they be using it for some esoteric purpose? Might they even be creating it? Well, if we speculate wildly, the answer might indeed be yes. And there is a final scenario, and it's one I even hesitate mentioning in this regard, but since we're wildly speculating here, after all, if we can wildly speculate about white dragon societies coming in magically with lots of money to save everybody's financial fire, if we can speculate wildly in that case, well, then let's speculate wildly in other areas. I hesitate mentioning this scenario because I'm not a subscriber to it, and that scenario is that of Zecharia Sitchin, who of course believes that the Nephilim or the Anunnaki, whatever you call them, I call them the genetic cousins, that came to Earth long ago were after gold and literally scouring the Earth to take gold off planet to fix the atmosphere on their home planet of Nibiru. Now, of course, I don't subscribe to any of that scenario that Sitchin has concocted, but it is an interesting scenario because, as I've mentioned in Babylon's Banksters, gold, for whatever reason, has always been associated with the gods. And could it be then that this gold quite literally is disappearing off planet? Well, that's a very wild speculation, I grant you. But let's go back to this whole idea of a breakaway civilization and to the fact that, at least in part, these bearer bonds with their bullion backing were indeed part of a hidden system of finance, because we do know, once again, that President Truman, when he found out about all of that gold buried in the Philippines that was only partially recovered by Captain Ed Lansdale and others, who later became so associated with the covert operations of the Office of Policy Coordination and the CIA during the 50s and 60s, that gold did indeed represent a hidden slush fund. It was a hidden mechanism of finance for what in effect ultimately became a kind of a rogue element within American intelligence, a breakaway civilization, as it were. So what we're doing now is speculating very, very wildly that this civilization may have developed those technologies that were discovered in phenomena during the 1920s and 30s in Japan and Germany of mercury transmuting into gold. and that were patented, there were patents taken out in Germany, that they might indeed have found something that enabled them to do that in significant amounts. They might indeed be shipping all of this gold off planet. To me, it's significant again that these countries are wanting physical possession of their gold. They no longer, in other words, trust the major financial institutions, the Bank of International Settlements, the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve in the United States. They no longer trust these central banks to store their gold for them. They want the actual physical possession. And that is the clearest signal to me that this financial system, whatever it is, whatever it ultimately represents, wild speculations or no, whatever it is, that financial system is under extreme pressure right now. The key here is, in fact, the Japanese and the Chinese. And in that respect, Wilcock and Fulford are correct in that if those nations all of a sudden demanded audits of the world's gold supply or even of their own national gold reserves, that might indeed expose the whole thing. So watch China and Japan in respect to this story very, very carefully, because I suspect that we're going to hear more from those two countries in connection with all of this in the future. Anyway, those are my really wild speculations, folks, and I emphasize again, there's not a shred of evidence out there for them. They are exactly what I say they are, really wild speculations. But we have to entertain, I think, until we do get more evidence as to what's going on, we have to entertain every possibility, even the implausible ones. Because as Sherlock Holmes says, it's only after you eliminate all of the possibilities that you're left with the implausible. And that might indeed be what's going on here. Anyway, see you everybody on the flip side, and thanks for listening. Bye-bye.